Greetings, all, and welcome to the second day of the International Conference on Positive Psychology. We are delighted to begin today's proceedings with the keynote session by Professor Dharm P. Bhawuk on Methodology for Indian Psychological Research. We look forward to gaining valuable insights from his vast expertise in indigenous and cross-cultural psychology. Professor Bhawuk, Professor of Management and Culture and Community Psychology at the University of Hawaii, Mānoa, USA, has published more than 120 papers and books, including Indigenous Indian Management, Cambridge Handbook of Intercultural Training, Indian Psychology, Lessons from the Bhagavad Gita, and Indian Contributions to Cross-Cultural Psychology. He is a founding fellow of the International Academy of Intercultural Research, a fellow of the Indian Academy of Management, a foreign fellow of the National Academy of Psychology, India, and H. Smith Research Junior Visiting Fellow, Center for Creative Leadership. We are really grateful for your presence today, sir. As chair for the session, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Rajbir Singh. Dr. Rajbir Singh is currently an adjunct professor at Chaudhry Ranbir Singh Institute of Social and Economic Change, Maharishi Dayanand University, Rohtak, and a visiting professor at Dada Lakshmi Chand State University of Performing and Visual Arts, Rohtak. Formerly, he served as professor and dean, Faculty of Behavioral Science at SGT University, Gurugram, and prior to that as Professor of Psychology at MDU Rohtak, where he also held several key positions, including Head of Department, Dean of Social Sciences, Dean Students Welfare, and Professor in charge of the Central Library. With over 42 years of teaching experience and specialization in the biological basis of behavior, Dr. Singh has guided over 20 PhD scholars. He has led UGC and DST sponsored research projects, coordinated UGC's Special Assistance Program in health psychology for a decade, and contributed extensively to the field through over 80 research publications, 3 authored books, and 4 edited volumes on health psychology, well-being, and research methods. Thank you, Dr. Rajbir Singh, for joining us today. We now warmly hand over the session to you.
Thank you, Ms. Purnima Singh, for the opening of this important session, which is on the methodology of psychological research. And we have a very important speaker who has also contributed in this particular area. And I'm sure that he has been always contributing to this international conference of the positive psychology. We look forward that today's deliberation on his Bharatiya psychological research would be very fruitful for all the young as well as mature research scholars or researchers in the field of psychology in the country, as well as abroad, because there are so many cultural similarities across countries also. So I think that we have 1 hour for all the deliberations. And if time permits, we'll have few minutes for some question answer sessions at the end. So I think that I now invite Professor Dharm P. Bhawuk for his presentation. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Let's close our eyes for 1 minute to connect in silence. You can slowly open your eyes. So over the years, I have been thinking about what words to use. And so I think in last year, 2024, January, I migrated from Indian psychology to Bharatiya psychology. I am still struggling with the word psychology. We can use manovigyan. That is a word we have, or that's a concept we have in Ayurveda. And when we think about it, the early, at least if we go to Freud, he was a medical doctor, and then the tradition of psychiatry is in the medical school. So Indian psychologists should not feel that now Ayurveda is going to dominate us. There will be always something to learn from the medical science. So if it is going to be Bharatiya, it will have to start from Ayurveda. So we are not going to get into that, but just to share with you how we all struggle with what words to use, what should we call our field itself. So that 1 minute silence, when you think about it, for positive psychology, that is both a practice and we can also do research on it. So all the research on mindfulness and meditation is really about silence, generally speaking. In India, of course, we have a word for it, Maun, and that's also a practice. But then, once you start doing the practice, then you start seeing the benefit. And that practice is common in daily practice also. So if we look at Western colleagues, so they have gone big on mindfulness. And of course, the practices are coming from Japan and China and Buddhist monks, where mindfulness, one part of practice of mindfulness is mindful eating, where you don't talk and you eat silently, focusing on the food. Now, in India, we have a tradition of keeping silent while eating. I practiced that myself when I was young. And so you can see Maun is one of the mindfulness practices if it is done during eating, and you can do it at different times. So when we think about positive psychology, we can think about silence, we can think about Maun, then we can think about different situations where we do Maun, and that will give us different practices. So that is just to connect with the Positive Psychology Association, because we are all interested in positive psychology. You can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, good. So if you read the abstract, in the abstract, I basically promised to do 6 things. I hope to be able to cover the first 4 and give you some hint about 5 and 6. So we'll look at the methodology for developing Bharatiya constructs, and then how we can develop models from text, how we can develop theories from text, and then we can go back to and look at some of the constructs that I have worked on myself. And the idea is to sensitize you to how Indian constructs, what Indian constructs will look like. In the second session, I'm going to talk about Western psychology and Bharatiya Gyan Sampadas. So that's the time when we'll have some more detailed insight in those constructs. I'll briefly note about how we can develop scale from text, and I have developed one from the Bhagavad Gita on leadership, and a doctoral student at IIT Kanpur collected data, and there's some support that it does predict leadership behavior. And then methodology for bridging life world and micro world or scientific world. So this, we have an advantage because we have all the living saints who are teaching certain practices. So they are practitioners. So we can look at their life, and then we can look at texts, and then we can bridge them. So 5 and 6, I may not be able to spend as much time, but briefly, that's the basic idea. So how can we develop Bharatiya constructs? We should start by looking at dictionary meanings of a word, and I'll give you why we do this. So this is related to lexical analysis. We should look at synonyms, we should look at antonyms, and we should do it in any Indian language. So if you can start with Sanskrit, that is good. But if you want to start with Tamil, that is wonderful if you have proficiency in that language. If you want to do it in Kannada, that is good. So depending on whatever language you are comfortable with or you are proficient in, that's what you should use. I'll come back to the next one, but briefly, what is lexical approach? So the lexical approach is inspired by Galton's 1884 study of personality, which is based on the assumption that culturally stable personality characteristics become a part of the language. So I would leave that culturally stable personality characteristics, I would rephrase that as culturally stable constructs. It doesn't have to be personality. These are ideas, these are concepts. They become a part of the language. So what does that tell us? We need to go to the language. So if we are doing Bharatiya, we should go to Bharatiya Bhasha. Here I should also note that the British called English language and all Indian language were called vernacular. In 2005, a young scholar shared with me and said, "Sir, you should you used the word vernacular." I was saddened because at least you should not use, and I apologized. And from that day on, I have never used the word vernacular for Indian languages, because Indian languages are as rich or richer than English and other European languages. And we have, 6, 7 major languages, and we have a few hundred other languages. And every language has its own text and, poetry and other things. So the lexical approach is the constructs become a part of the language, and single words capture the most important of these characteristics. So one of the ideas that cultural psychologists and cross-cultural psychologists talk about is how the Eskimo community has many words for snow, but the English-speaking people have snow and sludge and maybe 1 or 2 other words. And that shows how a concept is embedded in the ecology of a culture. And so this is exactly what Galton was saying. The assumption that culturally stable ideas, concepts, he was interested in personality characteristics, become a part of the language. And single word capture the most important of these characteristics. So when I was young, I could count 15, 20 varieties of rice. And clearly we have more varieties of rice. I learned that in Peru, they have 5,000 varieties of potato. Apparently, potato came from Peru to the rest of the world. Now, if they have 5,000 variety of potato, they probably have 5,000 words for it. That's what I'm talking about. This is the richness of language. And as psychologists and cultural psychologists, we need to go back to the language. In their psycholexical study of personality or traits using unabridged Webster's New International Dictionary, Allport and Oldbert noted that the correspondence between linguistic convention and psychological truth is mediated by culture. So now those of us who are comfortable with understanding mediation analysis, A causes B causes C, that's mediation analysis, that's mediation. So what he's saying is linguistic convention and psychological truth is mediated by culture. So linguistic convention leads to culture, leads to psychological truth. So if we are interested in psychological truth, we need to go to culture. In the culture, we need to go to the language, and that will give us, and that's the linguistic. So we have gone from psychological truth to culture to linguistics, and that's where the language will provide us insight into what we are interested in. Austin argued that words are not merely facts or things, but tools that can help us sharpen our awareness and thus understanding of phenomenon in the world. So he argued that words are used to do something. So when you say something, by saying that thing, something gets done. So especially imperatives. So don't go there. You have said it, but that is already causing an action. Those words are basically telling this person not to go there. And if the person doesn't go there, you have good communication. Now, when we start doing this lexical analysis, so where should we go? Now, in case of Indian psychology, and you may feel disadvantaged, but you are more advantaged than I am. I mean, think about it. I got a degree in mechanical engineering. So I did not even get psychology like you guys. I had one course of psychology that I got from MB Saran sir. Then I did MBA, and there I got organizational behavior. And so I got a little bit more psychology, which was organizational psychology. So all the concepts of leadership, organizational commitment, etc. Then I did PhD in with Professor Triandis in cultural psychology or cross-cultural psychology. And because, I was at the Institute of Labor Relations, so I also learned some industrial law, industrial relations practices, and human resource management practices. So when I started working in Indian psychology, I sat down and noted everything that I had read. And I had studied nothing in a school or college. Everything was self-study. So I had read the Ramayana, I had read the Mahabharata, I had started reading Bhagavad Gita. Oh, actually, when I did the listing, I had already studied Bhagavad Gita, and I had studied the Upanishads, I had studied abridged version of Yoga Vasist, of Ashtavakra Gita. And, so after making a list of those things, I said, yeah, I'm qualified to do some research in Indian psychology or Indian ideas. My point is, you already know Indian culture, you're qualified to do it. Start thinking in Indian languages. So the next thing is, we are blessed, we have texts. And those texts, you will see, give us a lot of insights, a lot of models, a lot of theories. So you can access Bhagavad Gita, Durga Saptashati, Ramayana by Valmiki, Tulsidas, or Kamb and others, Rudra Ashtadhyayi, Guru Granth Sahib, Sukhmani Sahib, the Holy Quran and Hadith. And I did not put here Kabir Sahib, but you can study Kabir Sahib's, collections. And for research, you should then follow one of his sampradayas. So there are many headquarters. So follow one of them. So I follow the Raipur branch, at least for my research. So one of my friends got me the books published by them. So at least I'm in a sampradaya, and hopefully they have done the due diligence and the text is reliable. Another reason I'm suggesting that we start with the texts is, if you think about Western psychology itself, all the knowledge in the West came from philosophy. Philosophers talked about all kinds of ideas, and they were basically the precursor of psychology, sociology, liberal arts, and you name it. So one of my students was working on organizational apology. So if you're going to study organizational apology, how do organizations apologize? We need to study apology. And if you follow apology, you will go to philosophy. So even in the Western world, if we are serious about pursuing a construct, a concept, we will willy-nilly be drawn into philosophy. Unfortunately, in the West, philosophy and psychology has been divorced. That divorce happened in the last century, and it started with behaviorism. So we can basically monkey the West and maintain that divorce, but then we will have no Indian concept, because all our concepts are rooted in Shastra. So text basically refers to Shastras. And so here are some examples, and you can see I'm being broad. So, and I did not actually, I have not put any of the Buddhist text or the Jain text, but if that is your expertise, then you should study that. So analyzing the usage of that concept, that word, in poetry, in proverbs, in daily communication. And so I've followed all of this for at least one construct, lajja. And it is interesting how we get multiple perspectives. If we use multiple texts and there is convergence, then that tells us that we are on to something. Just to spend a few minutes on lajja, colleagues were editing a volume, Handbook of Shame. So I said, are you interested in Indian perspective on shame? And they were very happy. They said, yes. And I already knew as a cross-cultural researcher that lajja is not exactly shame. So my first reason was, because I study Bhagavad Gita, I knew in chapter 16, we have 26 Daivi Sampad, and Hri or Lajja is one of them. So if Lajja is a Daivik Sampad, it's a positive psychological construct, so it cannot be negative. And shame and guilt both are negative concepts. So I already knew that I was going to enrich global psychology, as Professor Marcellas talked about. Indigenous psychology can enrich global psychology. Then, because I also, fast during Navratri and do the part of Durga Saptashati, and those days I used to know all the 4 prayers in chapter 1, 4, 5, and 11 by heart. And in each of those prayers, lajja is used positively as the synonym of Divine Mother. Because I also listen to and chant Lalita Sahasranam. Lajja is one of the names of Devi. So I have 2 texts, Bhagavad Gita and Durga Saptashati, that is telling me 2 things. Lajja is Daivik Sampad, so it's positive psychological construct. It cannot be negative. It's not Asuri Sampad. And it is the name of Divine Mother, or Lajja is Divine Mother personified. Therefore, it cannot be negative. Now, people who do not do this. So Richard Sweder, for example, has studied lajja, but he went and interviewed people. Why? Because he doesn't have access to Bhagavad Gita. He does not have access to Durga Saptashati. Good researcher, world-class scholar, follows the anthropological method, goes and talks to people. Now, people are telling him what they have learned, they have known, and sometimes you don't get to the original meaning of the word. When we talk about text, we should also keep in mind that we are blessed in India that we have commentary on texts. So in Bhagavad Gita, you can find, 9 major commentary and then a few tens of other commentaries. Almost everybody who has an spiritual inclination has done a commentary on Bhagavad Gita. So Vinoba Bhaveji has given a talk on Bhagavad Gita in Tihar jail. And that was the first commentary on Bhagavad Gita that I studied when I was about 18 years old. Gandhiji has written commentary on Bhagavad Gita because Vinobaji pushed him, said, you study Bhagavad Gita, you should write your commentary. So he wrote his commentary and he called it Gita Mata. So we not only have text, but we have a rich tradition of commentaries on text. Now, as researchers, what are those commentaries? Those are basically a practitioner, scholar's interpretation, explanation of the text. So that helps us to see different shades of meaning of that construct. Now, what I found was invariably every scholar had defined lajja as an internal governor that guides us in two situations. When we do not want to do something that we should do, lajja appears. When we are going to do something we should not do, akaraniya, so there's an internal mechanism that says, don't do it. And when we are not going to do that we should do, karaniya, then again lajja emerges. And it's a sanchari bhav, if we go to the bhav theory of Natya Shastra, and it makes sense. So something we should do, we are not going to do, lajja appears and we do it. Something we should not do, we are going to do it, lajja appears, we don't do it. So akaraniya, lajja appears and we don't do it. Karaniya, we are not going to do, lajja appears, therefore we do it. So we have texts which we can study ourselves. We can also study commentaries. Now in this case, all the commentators are unanimous about what is lajja, that it is the internal guidance. And if you read the commentaries in Sanskrit and understand, it is just beautifully explained in a psychological way. So we have the advantage of having text, we have the advantage of having commentaries, and then we also have modern day, saints and wise people who are there to give insight and explain concepts to us. So we have this rich opportunity to understand a construct, derive a construct from the text by studying commentaries to get a scholarly discussion of it. Then we can go and talk to people. Now, I must say that Richard Sweder and colleagues did come to the same conclusion that lajja is something that makes people act properly. You don't get the karaniya, akaraniya differentiation, but at least you get that meaning. Now, what that helped me do as a cross-cultural researcher, I'm aware that in the West, people say guilt is better than shame. Guilt is internal, shame is external. And that whole thing then is taken a few steps further, and then they say Western culture is guilt-driven, Asian cultures are shame-driven. Now that whole thing just does not make sense. It is not only an artifact of Western psychology and anthropology, but it's also a false explanation. Haya. So if we study Islamic culture, the Noble Quran and Hadith, and I'm blessed I have a student from Saudi Arabia. So in my study, I did not find anything in the Noble Quran, but he was able to find something. And this is what happens. Native speakers can understand things better. Haya is absolutely the same as lajja. It's a positive construct and people use it all the time. And Prophet Muhammad said, those who do not have lajja, don't even worry about them. They are on a slippery slope. Haya also works in the Philippines the same way. Haya, or a similar word, lajja in Japan, works in the same way. It's an internal mechanism that controls our behavior. So starting from Indian psychological concept. So lajja is a word, and then we can look at all the other words that are associated with it. I was able to challenge Western idea of guilt and shame culture, I was able to show that lajja is both shame and guilt. And if you translate all the shame, guilt related words, synonyms and antonyms into Hindi, I have done that in a paper published in 23, we see that we basically get lajjaheen, not lajja. So lajja comes out as a positive word. It does not even translate as shame and guilt. So in brief, the methodology is that we start with text, commentaries, and then we develop the concept, and then we can look at how it is used in proverbs, how it is used in daily communication. And now after that, we can go and interview people to see how that concept works today. And then we can also go and collect data and do experimental design to see what other variables this construct can predict. So the last point I had skipped. So I also extend what they have proposed by tracing the development of meaning of the target word by examining multiple texts in various cultural domains. Developing models. So one verse of Bhagavad Gita in chapter 3 gave me this understanding of what is Indian self. So Sri Krishna says, the manas is stronger than the senses. Buddhi is stronger than manas, and that, referring to the Atman, is stronger than buddhi. So we get a hierarchy of self. Now, what is fascinating about this concept of self, and I'll compare it with the Western concept of self in the next presentation, we do not forget the physical self. You can see in Sri Krishna does not forget the physical self. In fact, we break down the physical self into senses. Now, those 5 senses are absolutely important. So because I teach in a business school, I can see that there is an industry related to each of these senses. So skin, the sense of touch, garment industry. Tongue, taste, food industry. Nose, smelling, fragrance, the entire fragrance industry, perfumes industry. Ears, auditory, music industry. Eyes, when we travel, or movies. Now, movies and video games are, now you can see why they are so powerful, because they capture 2 of the senses, both eyes and ears. So we usually don't watch silent movies. That was more than 100 years ago. So that's why films have power. That's why video games are addictive, because it takes 2 of the 5 powers. And if we can also add some sense there, like in simulations, airplane simulations then we can take the third sense where there may be some smoke that we can, some fragrance and the other things. So the point here is self is not simply psychological. Self starts with the senses. Everything we do is related to how we process the signals. And it is there in one verse of Bhagavad Gita. This verse is also paralleled in Kathopanishad. So now we see this connectivity. But we can go further to other Upanishads, and then we see that we also have the concept of 5 sheaths of self. So we start with Annamaya. So Annamaya is physical, that is here, but Pranamaya is not here in this model. And you can see how important that pranamaya self is, because all of pranayam has both physical and psychological benefits. We already know how much health benefits they have. So thanks to Ramdev Baba, he has taken yoga in every home. And I hope we will not differentiate Hatha Yoga and Pranayam from Raj Yoga, because they are actually connected. You want to think about creativity? I always like to say, we are bipeds. Why would somebody want to stand on his or her head? I mean, think about it. How creative do you have to be? And they must have experimented on themselves, or they had insights, or Lord Shiva taught somebody and therefore he taught everybody else after that. Whatever, however you want to look at it. But why would a human being stand on his head or her head? And now we know all the benefits of it. Why would you want to twist your body into Sarvangasana or Halasana? And if you focus on it, it's not only Hatha Yoga, it's not physical. Because if you are sitting in Halasana for 5 minutes, it's going to do something to your body and mind and prana. So we're talking about pranamaya course. So we have all these pranayams, Vastrika, Kapalbhati, Brahmika, or Brahmari. And they have wonderful benefits. During COVID time, we all learned the value of Brahmari pranayama. By that humming sound, we create, what is it, nitric oxide or something that is good for health. You don't have to do anything else. You can do it anytime. So Annamaya kosh, Pranamaya kosh, Manomaya kosh, that is Manas, we have that. Vijnanamaya kosh, that is Buddhi. And Anandamaya kosh, that's Atman. So now we can see in this model, if you use Taittiriya Upanishad, then we find that we have added another complexity here, that of Pranamaya. So Indian models are integrated. And this is one advantage we have. In the West, when we start with positive psychology, we leave negative completely. In India, we have Daivik and Asuri Sampad, both of them discussed in chapter 16. And Sri Krishna only lists Daivik Sampada because they appear in other places. But he spends the rest of the chapter describing Asuri Sampad. So you can see in India, we are integrative, we are synthesizer. And we see in this model of self, we are not leaving anything outside. I'll have more to say in the next presentation. So when you think about theory of self, if I add verse 7.4 from Bhagavad Gita, then I also get ahamkar, and kind of I get the Sankhya way of looking at it. And so the moment we add ahankar, we have buddhi, manas, ahankar, and we have another word in concept, construct in India, that of antahakarana. That's such a fascinating word. In the West, we only talk about mind. Mind is not manas. Mind is only cognitive. In the West, people are still fighting about cognition and affect. But in India, we are thinking about an internal agent, an internal agency. That's antakarana, something inside. And that is combination of manas, buddhi, and ahankar. And we still have the senses and the physical self and other things. We can build other models. So if you see my 2005 and 2008 paper, you'll see that by using other verses. So in this case, we only used one verse, 3.42. Here we used two verses, 3.42 and 7.4. Here we are using multiple verses. So this is how you develop now models. And we can see that if we follow any of the paths of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, then that basically starts changing ourselves, we have an internal journey, and we start looking at the world differently. We start addressing Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Mad, Matsar. And so, but if we don't follow that path, then in the world, we are constantly magnifying our Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Mad, Matsar. And so this is another way of looking at in the Indian worldview. So how are we going to change people's behavior? Well, we are going to have some intervention. And so all of these 4 paths are basically interventions. Okay, I'm going to, so you can see the detail in the 2005 and 11, but we can use different verses to create more complex models. So you can use 1 verse, 2 verse, many verses across chapters to create models. It's interesting. I developed a model in 1999, and then I wrote about the other model in 2011, but I never thought about those 2 verses in chapter 2 as giving me a theory of anger. So, dhyayato visayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodho vijayate क्रोधाद भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृति विभ्रमः स्मृति भ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति. Just these 2 verses. I'll come back to the other verses later. So the first verse tells us dhyayato vishayan, the self, when thinks about thought, vishay, any of the 5 senses related, food, fragrance, song, whatever, you think about it, sangat sanjayat, dhyayato visyan pumsa sangatesu pajayate, you get attachment, sangat sanjayate kama. From there we get sang, attachment, and from attachment we get desire, and from desire we get anger. So I kind of added that, well, when we have desire, when the desire gets fulfilled, then we want more of it, then that is greed. And when there is a hurdle in the path of our desire, then we get angry. If we can't do something that we want to do, we get angry, we get upset. So I left it there. But 10 years later, in 2021, I went and completed writing this part. So you can see when we do Vishaya Dhyan, we have Vishaya Sang, we have attachment. That leads to Kam, desire, and that leads to Krodh. The second verse, 263, now tells us what happens after that. When we have Krodh, we get Sammoh, we have Moh. When we have Sammoh, that leads to Smriti Bhramsh, Smriti Vibhram. So we get further confused and our memory does not work, meaning we are not able to make decision properly. And so that leads to Buddhi Nasha. Our Buddhi is polluted, does not work. And then that leads to Pranashati, total destruction. Adi Shankar interprets that Pranashati as Purusartha Ayogya. So we are now not able to do Purushartha, which is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So now let's bring Western knowledge system. So Krodha is a construct. What is before Krodha is proximal antecedent, so that is Kama. And what is before that is distal antecedent. So Vishaya Sangha and Vishaya Dhyana is distal antecedent. If we look, what is after Krodha? Sammoha, that is proximal consequent. Krodh causes something. That's, if you want, it's a mediation behavior or consequence. Sammoha causes Bhramsh, Buddhinash, Pranasati. So those are distal consequence. What is a theory? If we understand a construct, Krodha, and its antecedents and its consequence, we have a theory. In 2 verses, Sri Krishna gives us a psychological theory of Krodha. So I'll invite you to read that paper to see how that is not my contribution, Sri Krishna's contribution in understanding Krodha in a theoretical way. Because we really in the West don't have a theory of anger. we simply look at it as a phenomenon. So when you get angry, start counting 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, and that will help you disassociate from it. What does Bhagavad Gita tell us? It tells us what is the cause of krodha? Desire. What is the cause of desire? Asakti with something. What is the cause of that? Thinking about it. So, what is the solution? Don't think about it. Don't get asakti. Don't desire. See, you have 3-step solution. And you can work on all of them. But now you know exactly why you get angry. I'll give you an example. So I meditate in the morning. And when I was raising, we were raising our sons then, I used to do for 20, 30 minutes in the morning. And so I would come out after meditation and I'm ready to take my 2 sons to drop them to school. And they're doing something that they should not be doing. And I get spike of anger. And so I would scold them, correct their behavior. But as a reflective person, I said, why am I getting angry? The purpose of meditation is to calm me down. And I could see the spike. So it's almost like when the lake is calm, you drop a pebble and then you have ripples. And the ripples are quite big. But when I reflected on it, I saw I had expectations from my sons. See, kamana, another word in interpersonal context, is expectation. So I need to control that expectation. So we basically set ground rules. Your bags should be packed at night. In the morning for breakfast, we have a menu. You decide Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, what you are going to have breakfast. And mom will give you that breakfast. If you want something else, it depends on you and how you ask mom. And if she wants to, she will, otherwise stick to the menu. So we create a structure to solve the arising of krodha because now expectations are leveled. Those of you who think about it, when we go to a class and we give a syllabus, what are we doing? We are leveling expectation. In training literature, we call about leveling of expectation. So the trainees know what the trainer is going to do, and getting feedback from the trainee, the trainer knows what they're getting and what their expectation is. So leveling of expectation is managing that karma, that desire. So if we can manage expectation, we will not get angry. So you can see we have a rigorous theory of krodha or anger coming from Bhagavad Gita in simple 2 slokas, but they are absolutely insightful, and it fits the entire research on mindfulness. How, and they don't have really theory of krodha or anger, but we have a reasonable theory that makes intuitive sense, and it also makes sense in practical application. So we've covered how to build models, how to build theories. Now, if you study the texts, then the texts, first we study the text, we go through the text as Chinmayanand ji told his disciples. You don't go through the Upanishads, you allow the Upanishads to go through you. So in the beginning, we go through the Upanishads, and then if we keep studying it with Shraddha, then the Upanishad starts going through us, and we start seeing these connections. So after many years, I also noticed that Sanskrit has a beautiful structure of grammar. So Panchami Vibhakti is used to show Kamat Krodho Vijayate, Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha, Sammohat Smriti Vibhrams. So A causes B causes C. Even the language gives you that signal. We can make it more complex, then we can replace Krodh with Shadripu or the 6 Asuri Sampad. So the model around it can remain the same, and we have those 6, or we can focus on any of these, and then what is on the left is antecedent, what is on the right becomes consequent. So I had promised you that hopefully I will cover those 4. For developing scales, what we have to do is we read the verses, and so it will take 4 or 5 steps. So first you simply write what you understand from the verse and how that will work. So I was thinking about karma yoga and leadership. So what do leaders do? Or what does a lok sangrahi do? So the scale is on lok sangraha. And so write items that reflect the verses. So we wrote 11 items from 11 verses. And then we rephrase the words so that it is not too long, that it is clear, that it makes sense. If you're writing for students, you got to provide some context. You're writing for managers, you provide some other context. So, that polishing takes place. And then, in 4 iteration, we will have a scale that is quite faithful to the text. I mentioned briefly about the life world and micro world. So we have practitioners. So I've written 2 papers that's about the Acharya of BAPS, Sampradaya. And so what I basically did was I analyzed Bhagavad Gita, and from Bhagavad Gita, I drew the definition of a sadhu. So that is from the text. And then I looked at what people had said and written about Pramukh Swamiji Maharaj and what were those characteristics. And then I connected what was in the text about a sadhu and the behavior of a sadhu, a real sadhu. And so that is bridging the life world and the micro world or the scientific world. So the texts are part of scientific world, and the practitioner, the yogi, the sadhu is part of the world of practice, and we can connect those two. And again, we have this advantage, which is difficult to find in other cultures. And they may have that advantage, but they will have to do that because we do not know their culture. More recently, we just finished a paper on Marcus Aurelius. So we studied Marcus Aurelius's meditations in English, and then we analyzed the text and we derived themes from it. And we wrote a paper about what is nature in Marcus Aurelius and what is its importance for C-suite managers. So chief executive, chief information officer, chief HR officer. And so we can do, but there the limitation is the original is in Greek. I'm reading an English translation, so I'm not getting the exact Greek words. So I have to, so once I identify a theme, a construct, then I go back to Greek and kind of get a perspective on it. But if we bring a Greek scholar, one who can read, write Greek, understand, then we'll be able to bridge that, just the way I was able to do with Haya, with my student from Saudi Arabia. So this is what I was planning to share with you. I think we have about 5 minutes that we can take question answer. I can stop there actually. While you are thinking the question, basically, as a indigenous researcher, know yourself. You are the most important resource. Your experience is valid. Know your culture, study classic, literature, history, ecology, watch movies, play, dance, art, breathe the culture. So you can see being an indigenous researcher is wonderful. I watch Indian television with my wife and I learned so much about Indian culture. And even if it is tinted by Bollywood or Mumbai creative people, there is still something about the culture. So for example, that musical something bandit. So you see the sadhana of a musician in the tradition, how difficult the practice was. And so there's always something to learn as an indigenous researcher. Okay, I would like to stop there. And if you have questions, comments, we can do that.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
I think Miss Purnima Singh is supposed to coordinate it, but by the time I have thoroughly enjoyed the lecture, and you know that I am in this field. Start from my graduation days, I was lucky to read philosophy as well as psychology together, and you know then slowly moving to the, the influence of more Western, psychology, which was, of course, here in all the academic world in India. And then the same kind of divorcing the philosophy happened. And then we thought ourselves that if there has to be a construct which is emanating from our texts, there has to be the final thing that how to make it a scientific construct. Because the term and the definition in scientific constructs and simply a construct, all right, that we have seen you that you have very sequentially helped us to know that how this methodology would go to just understand the constructs and then to find out the models which are already existing in our texts and even theories, as you have mentioned, the theory of growth. So, but that final question always remains with us. All the researchers here in India who are not necessarily wishing to follow the Western model, but that question of how to validate these constructs scientifically. That is my hunch. If you can. Uh,
Sure. So basically, when let's see, I should go to screen sharing right here. No, I think I have to. Yeah. So you can see the screen. So when we think about when we came to development of scales, so this is where constructs are being operationalized.
Fine.
So from this point onward is what basically what we consider science in the West in the positive sense starts. Now, what I'm basically saying is we cannot simply take a leadership scale from the West and translate it and collect data and think that we are doing science. Because as cross-cultural researcher, I already know that is pseudo-ethic, pseudo-universal, imposed ethic. It is a Western idea that we are testing in India. So if we now have, what is leadership? In India, leadership will be Lok Sangraha. So we should not even study leadership, we should study Lok Sangraha. If you think about, so in my 2008 paper in the Handbook of Indian Psychology, I talked about 4 different types of leaders. So Karma Yogis are all around us. The Indian Prime Minister is a living example of it. But so was Jawaharlal Nehru ji. So we have examples. So was Vinoba Bhave, so was Gandhi ji. So when we look at these people, we should not study leadership, we should study Karma Yogi. And then we can say who Karma Yogis are, because they do Lok Sangraha. So now we have a better understanding of an Indian leader. So to measure that, we got to develop a scale for Lok Sangraha, not of leadership. Similarly, if we develop a scale for Lajja in different contexts, then we may be able to predict some behavior of interest. So at this point in my life, and I'm going to hide behind Maslow. So when Maslow Sahab wrote his, 5 bases of motivation, he was 64 years old, I'm 68. So he said he was too old to go and test it. Let other people test it. So I'm going to spend the next 20, 30 years of my life, or 50 years if I live, developing constructs. And I'm happy to work with young people. So I'm working with some people. Somebody is working on mindfulness. Somebody is working on gratefulness. So I'm happy to work with them. Happiness. So I would start with sukha and dukha. not happiness.
Okay.
Happiness makes no sense in India.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely no sense. It makes sense
Yeah,
to all of us in this room because we are bilingual. And we are
I get your point here.
sophisticated.
Yes,
We are
you have mentioned
sophisticated.
that. Yes,
Yeah, we are
integration.
sophisticated bilinguals. We can dream in English.
Yeah.
So our neurons are clustered in English in one part of the brain and Indian language in another part of the world. And I've seen this, how they sometimes don't connect. I'll give you a quick example. If you say knowledge, I will think about epistemology, axiology, ontology, the whole thing. But Gyan will not come to my mind. It happened to me in a workshop. The moment somebody said Gyan, I said, I think about other things. Śraddhavan labhate jnanam. Gyan and Śraddha is connected. When I think about Western knowledge, I don't think about Śraddha.
Yes.
When I think about Gyan, then I think about Bhagavad Gita and how Sri Krishna says all the knowledge of the world is one type of knowledge. And the pursuit of the knowledge beyond is knowledge. Now that is the concept of Gyan. Knowing the self is Gyan. But when I talk about knowledge, it does not trigger those neurons in my mind. So basically I'm saying we can do positivist research. But as a cultural researcher, we need to develop our own constructs, our own measures. And we are 1.4 billion Indians. We don't need to fit into the Western journals.
That's right.
They don't have to understand Lajja. We understand Lajja. That is good enough. Let's go and find out the consequences of Lajja. So probably if we are interested in Saas Bahu Ka Sangram, we'll probably find that Lajja is missing.
Yes.
So we will have a deeper understanding, but we'll also have a behavioral intervention. Let's cultivate Lajja. I wrote a paper on Lajja where I did autoethnography. So in IIT, I became shameless.
Yes.
My speech was ashuddha. I used the 4-letter word, not love, profusely. And so Vak Ashuddhi leads to Manas Ashuddhi and then everything else. Because
Professor Bhawuk, I would like to intervene here in the context of Lajja. Why culturally it has become more, gender bias? Lajja is something culturally used more for, it's a feminine concept. Whereas I don't think
that we are presenting that. I was presenting that with Richa ji in Indore, and after the session, a young scholar came and talked to Richa ji for 1 hour and gave her hard time, saying, "How dare you call it feminine concept? मर्दों को भी लज्जा होती है, बहुत कष्ट होता है."
culturally, it has happened culturally. So
agreed, because think about it. The other word for dupatta is lajja.
Yeah.
So there is a feminine, strong correlation with that word.
Yes.
But let's not forget, if Divine Mother, if Durga is Lajja, that's her Swaroop, what is she doing? She is saving the hide of the male gods.
Yes.
When the male gods cannot fight, cannot win, she comes and helps them.
Yes, right.
So I'm not disagreeing, denying that, yes, over the years we have taken, there is a emphasis of Lajja as a feminine quality, but that is not in the text. And when you think about it, I remember when I was young, at home we would have discussion about Charitra. And it was very clear to me, even at a young age, that Charitra was important both for women and men, girls and boys.
True.
ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ लड़की का चरित्र होता है, लड़का का चरित्र नहीं होता है.
You're right.
लेकिन देखने से लगता है जैसे men have more exception than women, but that's not true. Men who do not act properly, they are charitrahin.
Yes.
We may glorify, Sarat Chandra ji glorified Devdas, but basically that's glorification in his contemporary world. He saw the struggle between a father and son, and that's how he depicted it. But basically it is also, if you think from today's perspective, if you see Devdas version 4, it is glorifying addiction.
Yes.
And if you look at Hindi movies, you can see how from Kesto Mukherjee to Amitabh Bachchan to everybody, there's always a scene when he's drunk. And that's supposed to be okay or funny. But that's how the society changes. So it's not only lajja. There are a lot of things that we have done, but that's important. We must study that. And today, if we find that lajja has become more feminine oriented or demanding for women than for men, then that is a fact. That is the social
Professor Bhawuk.
जी
See, हम इसे कंटिन्यू रखते हैं सर अगले वाले सेशन में. आपका एक और सेशन है
Absolutely.
उसमें बहुत सारा डिस्कस करते हैं.
Absolutely.
जी जी. अभी एक्चुअली नेक्स्ट प्रेजेंटेशन के लिए प्रोफेसर Mawson is there.
जी.
So
Okay then.
let's
Okay then.
continue in next session, please.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
sir. Thank you
जी,
very much.
जी, नमस्कार.
Okay.
So I'll sign out and sign in again after 2 hours.
Ji, please.
जी.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kamlesh. I think my job is also over. Thank you, Professor Bhawuk, and all the NPPA organizers to give me an opportunity to listen, Professor Bhawuk. Thank you so much.
Sure. We'll see you in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Bhawuk and Professor Rajveer for adeptly steering us through methods in Indian psychology. I will hand over the session now to Śraddhā, who will move us on to our next session.